So any moment now, people will be rejoining us. They're just watching the end of the video. So they're almost finished. So as you're coming back online, if you'd just like to let us know you're here. Back online says Steve. Thank you, Steve. Aaron, here. Bavk, says somebody, who accidentally put a V in there. Back with you. Fantastic. Okay, so back over to you. Malcolm, let me know when you want me to put the next slide up.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Well, hopefully that video gave you a kind of insight into how Honda attempt to communicate their intent, a business based on dreams. Now, of course, they're also a profitable global organization that manufacture products. So they've got all the challenges of every other organization in the private sector. But they have chosen to come up with a vision statement that is far more emotive than it is rational. It tries to talk to the heart as well as the head, and by using music as a way of invoking feeling, it tries to engage people in the intent of the organization.
So
that's an example.
Malcolm, one person said they didn't get the video. Could you just, in summary, a sentence or two, just translate, if you like, or give a summarize of what was in the video so they can get it?
So the video showed the movement of the Honda dream from being an organization that made simple engines for a motorcycle, which is where it started, through to an organization that now builds robots and spaceships. And it has a piece of music playing in the background. So kind of historic journey that organization's been on. That helped?
Perfect. Thanks, Mal.
So at this point, I'd just like to ask Susan particularly, has she come across any examples in her working career of organizations that have crafted vision statements, and maybe some of the challenges they've faced in just coming up with the answer to the question, what's the purpose, why are we here? Susan.
Susan, can you just unmute? There you go. Perfect.
I realised I was still muted. I think in my experience, one of the key challenges that organisations at times find is recognising who they need to involve in the process and when. Because sometimes the focus is very much on the very senior team. Sometimes people take the time to involve a wider audience. I worked with a police organisation, and they just worked with the senior team on putting together their vision statement and their values linked to the strategy, but didn't involve the wider organisation until everything was put together and done. And then they said, this is what we expect of you, and this is how you should behave in accordance with that. So that was an example of an organisation that, should I say, didn't take the time to involve the wider organisation, whereby the people are ultimately the brand ambassadors of the organisation, and in many ways represent the market, the customers, the clients that the organisation is trying to reach. So that's one example.
Okay, thanks, Susan. David, do you have any comments to add at this point?
Well, the NHS is a bit of a different beast in that people have huge expectations and growing expectations about their healthcare, and it's very highly politicized. So people's vision and expectations are connected with politicians, politics, and statements in the press extremely heavily. And those people who are providing the care have very little voice in terms of communication outside, particularly where it extends to individual issues, because of course they're constrained by patient confidentiality in any case. But in terms of the wider vision, That's very much a political football.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think it is interesting in different size organisations how this challenge morphs into being a different shaped challenge. Certainly in the private sector, organisations do strategy and vision work on a fairly regular basis. In the smaller SME sector, it's driven by the owners and the desire of the owners to kind of grow the organisation, and they often do it spasmodically. In the public sector, and indeed in large low corporate organisations, it's often triggered by the budget process that says, okay, we've got to set the budget for next year, let's do some strategic thinking ahead of that, and then let's take that thinking and cascade it into budget thinking. I think, whilst the challenges are different in every organisation, there are some commonalities that I've noticed in my profession when it comes to crafting vision and strategy. I think the first thing to think about is what's the trigger? What's causing us to do this thinking in the first place? Simon, I think you've got a series of 3 slides now just to show. The first one talks about the storm being here. What I mean by this is an organisation that is clearly in trouble. The growth curve flattened, the profitability is beginning to be under threat, the competitor threat's real, it's imminent, it's a present danger. There are existing process issues in the organisation that are causing them to plenty of stress and strain. So if you look at the organisation, you know they're in the middle of a storm. I have to say that is probably the worst place to be when it comes to do strategic thinking, because the immediacy of the challenge that the organisation face means that it's much more likely that people will approach that challenge using what I call an operational mindset. They'll try and list the problems, filter them, sort them, and then put a plan together to fix them. And to be perfectly honest, that's the correct thing to do if your business is in trouble. But the strategic work that gets done in an organisation in the middle of a storm is very much akin to a kind of recovery process. It's an action-oriented planning process rather than an open-minded strategic thinking process. The next slide this is a better place to be, which is where you're not in trouble as an organisation yet. You can see on the horizon a storm coming. That storm usually, in these days at least, is a function of a new business model emerging for your market sector. The internet is a fabulous, the age of information has been a fabulous trigger for this. We're all looking at our businesses thinking what we used to do in the past compared to what we can do now because we're enabled by technology in various shapes and sizes. So new business models are emerging, new opportunities are arising. I'm sure the black cabs in London look at the Uber challenge and think we couldn't have predicted that 10 or 15 years ago. And they couldn't, but they can now. It's very present, it's very imminent. So for them, that storm is almost upon them, and for some, it's obviously they're in the middle of it. So if you're in an organisation where you're doing okay at the moment, but you can see projecting forward what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening with your customers, your consumers, your patients, your citizens, you can see that the trends are beginning to emerge. That means the current way you do business needs to change. And that gives you a little bit of runway, a little bit of space to do some proper thinking about how can you morph your organisation, transform it if necessary, in order to deal with the new reality that's emerging. Far better place to be. Next slide. This is the best place to be in total. If you can be in a place where you're doing okay, there aren't any storm clouds on the horizon, now's the time to do some thinking. How do we maintain the clear gap that we have between us and our competitors, or between us and our other service areas? How can we make sure we can keep in tune with the emerging trends, what's happening in the geopolitical world, whatever is appropriate external environment that we have to respond to? That gives you plenty of time to do thinking, put plans in place, and test new ways of working. And that is by far the best way, a best place to be to do strategic and vision work, where there isn't any immediate pressures and you can let your mind wander free as to what challenges we should be considering in the future. So I guess this takes us into our first poll. Actually, I'd be interested on the people in the webinar what is your situation in your organization? Are you in the storm is here category? Are you in the storm is coming? Or are you in the lucky place that you can make, it's time to make a storm for someone else? So Simon, I think you've got a poll to share with us.
Yes, and I've just put that up. So those of you watching, if you just like to vote, you'll see the poll in your chat stream there.
And whilst that's going on, I'll just share some of my experiences working with leadership teams. I have to say, in the teams that I've been pulled in to help in this space, the majority of them are either in situation 1 or situation 2. They're in situation 1, they know they're in trouble, they've got to find a new strategy. They can't improve their way out of it. They've got to think differently. I think Einstein famously said, the thinking that got us into this mess is going to be the thinking that gets us out of it. I'm sure he was more eloquent than that, but roughly speaking, that's what he was saying. And a lot of the leadership teams I've worked with have been in that situation. Some I've worked with have actually been predicting competitor work, what's going to happen, or they've predicted a regulatory change or a legal change or an environmental change, and are beginning to think through what the impact of that change will be on their organization. So they're in kind of level 2. I think level 3, I've yet to work with an organization that's had the luxury to say we're doing great, because the tendency is if we're doing great, well, let's carry on. There's no need to radically change or even think about changing. We just move up the performance curve. We don't have to shift the curve. So I've very little experience. So I'll be interested to see what the distribution is from the poll. Do you have any results there, Simon?
Yes, the results are in. Storm is here. 33% of the people on the call, they're in the middle of a storm. So congratulations for making it here today. 42%, they can see the storm coming. And as you sort of predicted a bit, only 25% think that it's time to make a storm for someone else.
Yeah, that pretty much matches my experience as well, I have to say, in working with this area. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how do you go about bringing vision and strategy to life. And I think what we should start with is try and clear up some of the definitions of what we mean by vision and strategy. And I think the first thing we need to think about, Simon, if you show the next slide, please, is who are the potential audiences for this. And I think there are 4, basically. If you're a private company and somebody owns you, whether it be shareholders or an investment group or a series of individuals, the investors, they want to see your strategic thinking in order to give them confidence that you've got clarity of where you're going with the organization, the leadership has worked together well and has clarified what the picture of the futures looks like, and they've got some sense of direction. Ultimately, of course, investors are looking for a return. So if they put money into the organization, they're looking for some security that they're going to get that money back plus some. So they're an important group to consider if you're a private company. The second group is the people you serve, your organization serves, be them customers, consumers, citizens, or patients in the public sector. Certainly in the private sector, what customers are demanding is you think about something, we are far more demanding as consumers than we ever were in the past. I remember when I first got my a decent car and took it in for a service and it came back washed and valeted. That was a revelation to me. It was some time ago now, I hasten to add, but I thought, wow, they've managed to wash and valet the car as part of the service. Now, of course, next time I just expected that because it was offered once and now becomes expected. And many organizations are facing rising customer and consumer demands and expectations and are struggling to meet those. So the customers and consumers are a driving force for strategy and vision, and we need to understand where they're moving to. But what they want from us is confidence that we'll be able to provide them with the service and the products we're providing now. The third group, and for me the most important group actually of all of the groups that are interested in this, is the employees, the people who work for us. Particularly in this day and age, I think there is the millenniums and the young graduates that are coming out of universities now. The really good ones have got to pick up jobs, and there is still a war on talent. And whilst we're recruiting new graduates into our organizations, new technical specialists, one of the questions we should bear in mind is they're asking themselves is, why should they work for you? what are you going to do for them? And your vision and your strategy has a way of communicating your intent as an organization and how you intend to make a difference in the world. And that resonates a lot with the young technical and professionals that are coming into the marketplace at the moment, far more than I guess it did in my generation, where we were just looking for a job and a career. So employees need to answer the question, should I work here? Why do I work here? Am I adding any value? Do I feel that the work I do is contributing to a greater good other than paying the mortgage and paying the bills? And then the final group is the leaders in the organization. They're the ones that have got to craft the strategy, but they're also the ones that have got to consider, how do we use this? What, in the moments of truth where we have to make decisions, are we making decisions that move us towards our vision, that make a strategic difference? Now, Susan mentioned earlier that she's done some work in the employee engagement area in terms of strategy. So I'll just hand over to her a little bit to talk about engaging employees in particular. Susan.
Okay. One of the things I found, and I can use the example of a small SME, a science organization, highly specialized with highly specialized skills. As you've said, there's a key question that people ask is, should I work for this organization? Is it the right environment for me to work in? And yes, there is the starting point with the technical skills and capabilities and the ability to apply those skills. But what I found in this organization is that after people had decided to join, a time came when a lot of larger organizations were trying to headhunt and recruit people from the organization, offering higher salaries. But those people didn't actually take the jobs because they could clearly identify with the visions and the values and the whole strategy, the direction that the organization was going in. It was clearly articulated to them. They could see their place in that. And the leaders as a whole within the organization were also good in communicating that. So the whole culture was centered around the vision, the values, the strategy of the organization. And everyone was working around that. And what I found in this organization, it was important because it linked back to customers as well, in that when individuals went out to give presentations, when they spoke to people about the organization, they served as brand ambassadors because they had that clear knowledge and understanding of the organization, and they were able to represent it in a way that they wouldn't have done if the vision wasn't clearly articulated, if it didn't permeate across the organization, and it wasn't reflected in their strategy. And to some extent, as I said, it was a small organization. When it came to the whole issue of investors and shareholders and funding, if anyone spoke to the chief executive of the organization, he would paint a position. But the key is that each individual that you spoke to would reflect the same message. So there was that consistency that added additional confidence as well. So there is the significance of that for each of those groups. And I believe that in my experience, the engagement and involvement of employees within that really and truly brings it to life and makes it work for everyone else.
Yeah. Thanks. I agree. Once the leaders have crafted a clarity of vision and a strategy, engaging the organization in how we're going to deliver that is the key challenge for most businesses. And it's really important because it's not just the leaders that deliver strategic intent, it is the whole organization. And the more they can be engaged in crafting the thinking behind it, the more likely it is they understand it and are committed to delivering it. Okay, thanks. Let's look at the next slide, which is just trying to clarify some of the definitions associated with vision and strategy. As I said earlier, strategy is a strange word. It creates up all kinds of connotations and assumptions. So when we in the ChangeMakers use the terms mission statement or purpose statement, what we're really talking about is, why do you exist? What's your overall aim as an organization, and why should anyone care? And if the answers to that is to make money for shareholders, then don't be surprised if very few people are actually inspired by that. The vision, or the ambition, is much more about a destination. It's, where do you want to be in the future? And that destination has to be worth arriving at. So when I'm doing strategic work with leadership teams, I often start with the end in mind. And, you know, we talk a little bit about what type of organization do you want to lead and be proud of in 3 or 5, 10 years time, whatever the strategic horizon is that's appropriate. And we get people to think imaginatively about what type of organization would they be proud to work in. And I deliberately go for emotive words like proud, because I'm interested in the heart thinking as well as the head thinking, in order to get a vision that is compelling and engaging. Then, of course, you've got to have some values. How are you going to behave as an organization, and how are you going to deploy your leadership style in order to get those behaviors aligned behind your strategic intent? Now, a lot of existing behaviors, the existing culture of an organization, is a function of history. It's to do with embedded rituals and habits and the way we do things around here. And if your strategic intent is to move you to a different space, a different place, maybe a different set of consumers or customers, then perhaps a cultural shift is required. So reflecting on the values of the organization, how those values are brought to life, is part of this strategic thinking work. And then finally, strategy. When we use the word strategy, it's kind of, how are you going to get there? So you've got your purpose, you're clear why you exist, you've got your vision where you're heading towards, you've got your values, how you're going to behave as an organization to get there. Now, how are you actually going to do it? This is where strategic thinking starts to transcend from strategic work into leadership and operational work. What are the key things we have to focus on as an organization in order to succeed? What are the key strategic tasks or the must-win battles that you have to fight and you have to win if you're going to succeed? And again, the challenge here for organizations is to bring down the number to a manageable size. I always say the answer is somewhere between 4 and 6. 5, in other words, is a good one. If you're trying to do 2 or 3 key strategic things, that might not be ambitious enough. If you're trying to do 6, 7, or 8, you're probably stretching your organization too thin. The amount of spare capacity in any organization to change is probably at the maximum 20 to 25% of the available resource. And in some organizations that have been under stress for quite a while, resources being taken out, pressures are building, that number could be as low as 5 to 10% available time. In coordinating that time and focusing it behind some key must-win battles is one of the key challenges in this bringing vision and strategy to life space. David, do you have anything to say about how this comes to life within the NHS?
Yes, there are some very well publicized issues that are obvious from the media. The NHS has been struggling probably every year of its life, and every year it gets worse and worse, and the pressure which trusts are under now to deliver operationally is higher than it's ever been, and when pressures rise in the winter due to winter sickness bugs, it often overwhelms trusts, and setting time aside to be strategic is very, very difficult, and to get people to be able to join into this kind of work, the budget is very stretched to provide backfill, and in many respects, therefore, strategy is not done by trusts. It's largely set by the Department of Health, as it is, which again is politically interfered with and altered as the political colour changes every 4 to 5 years, and so strategic thinking has very low penetration. I think a point worthy of making is when you talked in terms of vision and inspiring the workforce. It's a moot point where we are with Mr. Hunt at the moment, and the strike that's going on today. Young people, as you say, think twice about where they're going to place their effort, and we hear a lot about how people think that maybe it's time to place their effort in a different country.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting how this plays out in the public sector, because they are under an additional level of scrutiny in the public sector. They've got everything has to be open to freedom of information. So a lot of the thinking and the creative, potentially visionary thinking, I find, gets constrained by the fact they don't want that raw thinking exposed to too much external pressure, because it is by definition raw thinking. So the people that have got strategic work to do in the public sector tend to be ultra cautious, and therefore they tend to change organizations slowly. There's no real transformation, other than as a result of a huge budget cut or a transformational shift in organizational design, which I know the NHS has been subject to over the years, and certainly the public local councils and real councils have been subject to now. The challenge is so great they can't simply improve their way out of it. They've got to think their way out of it. So they are coming up with new applications of technology, new ways of citizens interacting with their council that requires far less resource and pushes the burden actually back onto the citizens to do a lot of the thinking that used to be done for them. Politically, some people say that's a good thing. Politically, some people say that's a bad thing. The fact is, it's happening. So this is an interesting time, I think, for organizations to be considering vision and strategy, and certainly the need to do it well and to bring it to life and to make it resonate throughout the organization has never been greater. So let's think about the mindset. What type of mindset do you need to be in? Simon, if you could show the next slide, please, that would be great. I think if you think about work and when you're at work, there are 3 levels that you can be operating at. The lowest level, if you like, is operational work. And what I mean by operational work is when you're doing your short-term planning, prioritizing, organizing tasks, monitoring current and recent performance, giving feedback, course-correcting, troubleshooting, problem-solving, and basically carrying out the transactional activities required by your role, which of course add value and is, for many people, what they think they're paid to do. And that is operational work. And all of us have got a tranche of operational work to do as part of our day jobs. Those of us in management and leadership positions have a different level of work to do, though. That's leadership work. Leadership work is different from operational work and requires a different type of thinking. There are very few blueprints as to how to do leadership work well in your organization. There are hundreds of leadership books, millions of leadership consultants, but nobody has written down the blueprint for doing leadership in your organization, because the people who work for you don't work for anyone else. They are unique to your organization. So how you craft your leadership skills has to be unique to that situation as well. So when you're doing leadership work, it's more medium term. You're setting targets with other people. You're motivating, inspiring, influencing, communicating. You're creating challenging attitudes that are appropriate, developing real commitment from the employees towards delivering goals. You're directing, you're supporting, you're mentoring, you're coaching, and you're basically creating a climate where change can take hold and you can help others to succeed and celebrate when they do so. That's leadership work. It's very different from operational work. And what I've discovered, certainly in the last 5 years, it's fairly endemic. Operational work has got such a gravity associated with it that there is very little time for leaders to do leadership work. And when they do it, they tend to do it in an operational mindset. Oh, for instance, we've got to do PDPs, right? Let's get the template out. Which boxes need to be filled in? Let's email somebody, get the boxes filled in. Let's sit down. Let's get through it as quickly as possible. Think we've done it. That's not leadership work. That's doing a PDP in operational world. And many leaders are unfortunately guilty of that type of behaviour. It's simply because of the degree of operational pressure they're under. And then the final level of work is strategic work. That's the hardest level of all, actually. because that's where the tough questions get asked. This is where you have to answer the question, what do we want to be when we grow up? What's our real strengths? What's our real weaknesses? How am I going to steer this department, this function, this company, or this organization to a destination worth arriving at? The decisions you take in that level of work is, by definition, difficult. They're what I call sit-down decisions. You have to wander around a bit, sit down and think about them. Because if you're making a decision that doesn't make you think twice, it's likely to be an operational decision. It's fairly self-evident. However, if you've got real choice and the consequence of getting the decision wrong is fairly significant, then you're taking a strategic decision. And it tends to be people who work in that space get paid more. Why? Because it's harder work to do. But again, it's very difficult to find the time to do that work. As David's just said, in the NHS in particular, but in other large organisations as well, the operational treadmill is being pedalled so hard that finding the time to get off it and do this thinking is quite tough. When I wrote a book on strategy about 12 years ago, as part of the research for that book, we did a piece of survey work, and we asked the question, where are you when you're doing your strategic work? And the answer came back in the shower, in the drive, work, holiday, pretty much anywhere but work. We've created environments, or seemingly created environments, where strategic work isn't real work. It has to be done outside of real work. Real work is dealing with the inbox, it's going to meetings, it's short-term, it's operational work. That's what people consider real work to be. Yet if you're in a leadership position, or indeed in an ownership or senior executive position, you're actually getting paid to do strategic work, so you've got no option but to find time to do it well. But it is tough. As the next slide shows, Simon, thanks. The operational activity has a gravity. It will suck you in and it will keep you there. And part of the role that we play as change makers in organizations is to come in and create a little bit of space, a little bit of time, and create an environment where it's okay to do some strategic thinking. It's okay to challenge each other, think creatively about how you can handle some of the challenges you're facing. Next slide. So the next question I think I've got is, if you think about it, and you think about the last month at work, I know we've had the Easter holidays as it happens, but just imagine the last 4 or 5 weeks out of work. What percentage of the time, if you're being honest with yourself, do you spend in operational mode? What percentage of the time did you spend in leadership mode? And what percentage of the time did you spend in strategic mode? And this isn't a poll that I think you fill in, it's just something for you to think about.
Yeah, so if you just type in the box S percentage, L and the percentage, and O and the percentage, we'll get a feel for how your time is being spent at the moment.
And whilst you're doing that, let me just play back my experience. It's a question I've asked for the last 10 or 15 years, actually, when doing strategic work. I always ask this question, and regardless of where I am in the hierarchy of the organization, that could be at the executive level, group executive teams, or it could be in the depths of one of the functions in a department, looking at the team leader and the way they're working. The answers typically come back that strategic work is somewhere between 0 and 5, maybe 10% if I'm lucky. Leadership work comes back somewhere between 5 and 15, and then operational is the balance, somewhere between 75 and 85%. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just saying it's worth reflecting that if people at the very top are only spending 5 to 10% of the time doing strategic work, they're getting sucked into operational work. I often say to senior executives, you're doing your old job. It's time to do the job you're paid for. You've got other people. The reason they promoted you is you weren't that good at it. You've got really capable people doing it now. Now let's get on and do some tough work. Let's do some strategic work. And I kind of do that tongue in cheek, but it gets the point over that, you know, this finding time to do this work well is genuinely a challenge. And there's no easy answers. There's 168 hours in every week. There'll come a week when you don't get 168 hours, but until that time, you get 168 hours in every week, and it's up to you to decide how to use it. And as leaders, and strategic leaders particularly, you've got to make the choice to spend some time to do this, to do it well.
Okay, we've got a few answers.
And here as well.
few answers coming in, Malcolm. So we've got Patrick, strategic 25, leadership 60, operational 15.
Oh, very good.
Steve says due to the merger activity, it's 25, 25, 50.
Yeah.
A few people bearing out your observation, saying that it's 5% strategy, 10 to 25% leadership, and then 75%-ish, 70% of operational. A couple of people are 20, 20, 60 or 20, 40, 40. So generally between, I would say, about 5 and 25% for strategy, for strategic thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the upper end is unusual, but it does come along if there's been a merger or we're in a cycle of people doing their strategic work at the moment. And typically April, May time for people on an annual cycle tends to be the time of the year where strategy gets pulled out of the, metaphorically pulled out of the drawer and thought about. So it does vary during the year as well. Okay, thanks for doing that. I think the final point on this SLO model is to recognize that this isn't a capability issue, it's a capacity issue. In other words, every single person on the planet is capable of thinking strategically. They think strategically when they decide to get married or not, to whether to buy a house or rent, to some extent to replace the car, to go on an annual holiday. They're kind of strategic decisions. They've got medium and long-term implications, and they're usually quite expensive. So we've all got the capacity to do this, but we seem to have a habit and a ritual in the work that we've created, the workplaces we've created at least, seem to reward real work far more, and there's an urgency to it. Okay, so that's kind of the mindset you need to be in to do strategic work. It is a different mindset from leadership work. It's much more long-term. It needs a little bit more space and a little bit more calmness for it to be done well. It also, I believe, needs to be done collaboratively. I think, for those leaders that are quite autocratic or quite directional in their style, there is a tendency for them to do a lot of this thinking themselves and then deploy that thinking in a kind of influencing way. And I think it's often better to be much more collaborative in how you do this, so that people can be challenged with the questions that you're facing and see what the answers come up with. Brains in series rather than brains in parallel, as it were. Certainly the leadership team have got this responsibility. This is one of the areas where they can genuinely operate as a team and start to think about how to answer the tougher questions.
Okay.
Now,
doing great, Mal. We've got about 10 minutes to go for the whole webinar. So just to that quick timekeeping.
Thank you very much. So just a couple of quick examples. The next slide, Simon, please. These are companies. You can. This is just pass that one. Thank you. This slide is talking about companies and organisations and people. Come back.
Where are we, David?
Yeah, that's it. Stop.
Stop.
This slide's talking about organisations that I think have done it pretty well. Kennedy's to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade actually energized the whole nation at the time he said it in the early 60s. And the time he said he had no idea how, he had no idea how much it cost, but that's something that energized the nation and of course created NASA and all of the benefits that flew from that. Unilever, one of the big global organizations I've worked with and been fortunate to work with in different parts of the world with them, their overall purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace, which again is a brilliant high-level purpose for the organization, to allow everybody on the planet to get access to goods that make their lives more beneficial, and to do it in a sustainable way. Unilever set themselves a really tough target to grow the organization, double in size, but not change the environmental impact of their organization on the planet, which, when you understand their business, is a genuine challenge, and hats off to them for setting that as an aspiration. Coke's, to refresh the world, their vision statement for a while is to have a Coca-Cola within arm's reach of anyone on the planet who is thirsty. Again, you start thinking about that, it's just, wow, I mean, they are fairly ubiquitous, you can see them everywhere, but they haven't quite reached that aim, but it's a great aim to work for if you're looking to refresh thirsty people. And then finally, the BBC to be the most creative organisation in the world. All of these are examples of vision statements that create plenty of space for strategic thinking to take place. They're not too constraining. Once you've got a purpose statement that has the potential to inspire, then the challenge is to share it around the organization and use it as an inspirational vehicle. And I think one of the next poll we have for you is just a very quick one, really. It's just if you think about your own organization, how would you score your own purpose statement at the moment on a scale of 1 to 5? You put the next slide up with the poll up, Simon, please.
Poll is up, ready for people to vote.
Brilliant. It'll be interesting to see the results of that. But as they're coming through, let me flick to the last couple of slides. You flick the next one, Simon, if you can. Thank you. So you've got a clear purpose. You've got a clear vision. How are you actually going to get there? Now, I think this is where storytelling comes to the fore. It's definitely nothing to do with PowerPoint slides. You've got to ask the question, how are we going to take the organization from where it is now to where we want it to be? And actually clarifying where you want it to be has a clarifying effect on where you're starting from, interestingly. So that's where you start. Get the destination clear. Then come back to current reality and say, how are we going to get there? And basically, you're going to take the organization on a journey. You can choose to take them on a motorway or an autobahn, which is the quickest route from A to B. It's fast, it's efficient, but I tell you what, the food's not very good, the views are crap, and everybody's pedaling hard. You could take it on a country lane where you get nice views, countryside pubs, metaphorically, to stop in and think about. Much more pleasant journey, and creates the opportunity for the organization to evolve and change direction as reality gets in the way. Now, what does this look like for an organization for real? You just for the final slide, Simon, please. This is a CEO of a global drinks company, actually, explaining the journey that him and his leadership team had crafted together. We actually had a professional cartoonist working with us in this session, and whilst you can't see the detail of what's on the flip charts almost deliberately so, you get the idea that it's a journey that the organization's going on. It's got twists and turns, it's got risks, it's got some headwinds that they have to battle against, they've got some tailwinds blowing them along. There's opportunities there that they can realize along the way. There are also threats that need to be taken into account. Now, telling a story against the backcloth of a storyboard is far easier for leaders to do. They can use it as a way of showing how engaged they are with the journey. They can use it as a way of emphasizing key points that are important to them. And having a journey storyboard at the top of an organization that's clear and compelling, once you cascade it into the organization, you can create your own stories for various geographies or functions or departments, and again, engage people. If that's what the business as a whole is doing, what does our story look like? And it gives people a chance to get what Susan was talking about earlier, this kind of engagement and understanding, and a chance to contribute and shape what it is this organization is about to do. And I think that is a really powerful way of aligning people behind a strategic intent. Any results from those previous polls, Simon?
Yes, the result was 67% said that it was okay and could be better, and 33% said quite inspirational. So nobody was very inspirational, and luckily no pretty dull or dreadful ones.
Good, good. That is good.
Got a couple of questions when you're ready, Malcolm.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the last slide really from me is just to remind you that as part of this webinar, you can get access to our strategic health check document. It's quite a simple tool that allows you to assess against a series of statements how fit for purpose you think your strategy is. You can either do it as an individual and it draws you to some conclusions as to what the key strategic challenges are, or better still, use it as a team. Share it around the team and discuss what the answers are across the team. I'm always interested in one person has a particular perspective that's slightly out of line with the rest, because in that, that divergence, if you like, lies some opportunity, I believe. So it is a simple tool to use. Feel free to click and download it. And if you have any questions on how to use it, then just contact us, and I'm sure we'll clarify. So that's it from us, I think. Thanks for listening. Just into questions and answers, I think that was so.
Yeah, so as you say, the offer is there. Just click the button and that's a free download for you today. And so over to the first question. Got one here from John. It says, as the world is changing so incredibly fast now, is strategic planning now largely a waste of time? Most strategic plans are out of date as soon as they're published. Well, go for you first.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, John. I think there is certainly a trend now to have emerging strategic processes, ones that are live and aren't done on a kind of it's April, it's time to do strategy mentality. They are, once they become, the strategic storyboard has been written, if you like, it is a living document. And the beauty of doing it in a storyboard form is that as reality imports into the story, you can change direction, you can recreate what the story looks like as a consequence of what Jim Collins calls brutal reality getting in the way. So it is true. I think there's kind of every 2 years we do strategy, every 1 year we do mentalities being kicked into touch to a much more continuous strategic planning process. Certainly the smarter organisations are doing it on a continual basis. It's part of what the leadership revisit every time they meet.
Magic. Susan, any thoughts?
Possibly just to add to that, I mean, I think the fact that things change constantly actually mean that it's more important than ever to have a strategy in place. So at least you know where you're going. You're not totally distracted by other things that are going on around you, but you do take account of those things. And possibly something to consider as well in developing a strategy is to additionally have scenario planning involved. So you think of different options of, if this happens, this is what we would do. But there are also options B, C, and D, for an example, to take account of changes that may take place that affect your direction.
Thank you. David?
With regards to the NHS and public sector, it's been known for 15 years with the retirement of the baby boomers that these pressures are going to arise, and there is a lot of catch up to do because not a lot has happened due to political inaction. And whilst it is a changing world, and whilst technology is moving us on, this is creating opportunities. And there are two areas where strategy, two domains where having a strategic view has maximum impact. One of them is HR, and whilst chief execs do the best they can in terms of developing their staff and attitudes and culture, a lot of this is centralized around centralized pay bargaining and who we let into the country to nurse and who we don't, and today's arguments with doctors, another example. It's the other domain that is very interesting, and that domain is process engineering. Here, advances in technology are opening up huge avenues for performance improvement through better process, applying better process. So, for example, over the last few years, the numbers and types of operations that used to be done open and now through a telescope are legion, and the people's stay in hospital has been hugely reduced. And so whilst change does make you wonder whether the strategy is worth pursuing, you've got to keep a target in mind. There's no worry about not hitting the target that you had in mind 5 years ago, but you've got to know where you're going. That you've got to have your hand on the tiller, and in that respect, I second what Susan was saying.
Thank you, David. So if people wish to stay on the call, you're very welcome. But for those of you that need to go, just wanted to let you know about this evening's webinar, which is all about what style of leader are you. So that's at 7 o'clock this evening. Check on the links in your emails. But for those of you wishing to stick around, we've got another interesting question here from Nicola for you, Malcolm. It's very interesting that employee engagement seems to be a common theme as a weak link for organizations across all the ChangeMaker webinars. Do you think that's a failure to see that organizations are their people?
I don't think it's a failure to see that organizations are their people so much. I think certainly in the service sector, that's quite sharply in focus for them, and they have various tools and procedures and processes to develop their people in order to give the service that's required to compete and win. Having said that, the operational treadmill and the gravity associated with operational procedural work means that the engagement tactics that are often deployed are usually transmissions rather than communications. The engagement survey is a classic one, which I often call the mood survey. It's a kind of litmus test of how people feel at any point, and should be treated accordingly, in my opinion. I think as a leader, you should have your finger on the pulse and should be talking as much as you can throughout the organization to get a sense of how people are engaged. And of course, from a leader's perspective, they do find themselves saying the same thing time and time and time again, because communicating once will never do it. You've got to communicate, engage, reinforce, and carry on communicating. And that's quite an onerous task for leaders who've got other pressures on them to deliver performance and deal with current crises and all the other things that clutter their particular to-do list. So I have empathy for leaders who struggle with this, but I don't have any sympathy for them. The empathy extends as far as I realize how tough it is, but it has to be done. If they don't do it, nobody else will. And I do think there is an opportunity to close that gap.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed that and got some value out of it. The offer is there for you to give us a call. If anybody watching or anybody watching the replay is interested in chatting through the issues you may be having right now with your strategy, then I'm sure Malcolm, Susan and David would be very happy to get back to you and have a chat with you about that. So it only remains for me to say thank you very much to Malcolm, Susan and David, and I'll invite them to say goodbye to you, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, Symes. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, David. Thanks for your contribution. Cheers.
Take care.